The morning sun spilled across the lake, painting the water in shades of gold. Birds chirped lazily, and the air smelled faintly of pine and damp earth. Marcus Henley leaned back on the worn wooden railing of his grandfather's lake cabin, sipping coffee, enjoying the kind of peace that felt rare these days. This was his sanctuary. Every crack in the old cabin walls, every ripple on the water felt familiar and safe. He had worked hard to preserve it, keeping the memory of his family alive in every corner. Then, without warning, the calm shattered. Footsteps crunched aggressively on the gravel path, loud, deliberate. Marcus looked up and saw her, Delilah Cromwell, the HOA president, striding like she owned the lake. Her bright blazer clashed with the soft morning, and in her hand she waved a clipboard as if it were a weapon. "Mr. Henley," she barked, "you're in direct violation of Section 4.7. Your dock extends beyond approved boundaries." Marcus set his coffee down slowly, raising an eyebrow. She didn't know he was about to host the state attorney general inside. Not that it mattered to her. Delilah had a way of ignoring reality when it suited her. "You can't just come onto my property like this," he said, voice calm but firm. "Do you realize who I'm expecting today?" She waved him off, turning her glare toward the water, as if that somehow strengthened her authority. "Rules are rules, Mr. Henley. No one is above the HOA, not even you." "Rules," Marcus chuckled softly to himself, the kind of quiet laugh that never reached her ears, but carried the weight of patient calculation. He had known her type before, controlling, loud, convinced of her own importance, but he had also learned that arrogance often left cracks in the armor. She stomped closer, clipboard held high, eyes scanning the dock like a hawk. "This structure is illegal. I will not allow this." "You're trespassing," Marcus interrupted, his voice now firm enough to cut through the morning air. "And while I appreciate your enthusiasm for reading rules aloud, you have no authority here to enforce them physically." Her face twisted with surprise for a fraction of a second. Then it hardened again. "Excuses, Mr. Henley. I've heard plenty of those from people trying to skirt the law." Marcus didn't flinch. He knew confrontation was inevitable, but today he wasn't reacting. He was observing. Every step she took, every flinch of her hand, every sharp inhale of her breath told him more than any courtroom document ever could. She continued to pace, issuing threats, scribbling violations. Her arrogance was like a shield, but Marcus saw the cracks forming beneath it. While she flung accusations, he was already mapping out the consequences of every word, every action. She was loud and forceful, yes, but she had made two classic mistakes. She underestimated him, and she overestimated her own power. The clipboard nearly slipped from her hands as she leaned over the railing, peering at the dock with a scowl. "I am authorized to fine you, and you will comply immediately. This is non-negotiable." Marcus's eyes followed the sun glittering on the water, unshaken. "You might want to check the property records before issuing any fines," he said evenly, letting a hint of amusement enter his tone. "You might be surprised by what you find." Her lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't answer, but instead continued circling, muttering about violations and unauthorized modifications. She was unaware, utterly unaware, that justice was quietly lining up behind the calm exterior of this man. Inside the cabin, the tea kettle whistled softly. Marcus's mind was elsewhere, not on the confrontation, but on the quiet preparation he had done over the past few weeks. Legal papers, old deeds, proof of grandfathered rights, all stacked neatly on the table. If she had known what was inside, she might have reconsidered, but she didn't. She never saw the calm patience of a man who knew he didn't have to shout to win. Finally, she threw up her hands in frustration. "This is unacceptable. I will escalate this matter to the board. You will regret this, Mr. Henley." Marcus smiled faintly, letting the words hang in the air like smoke. He had expected threats. He had expected arrogance. But what he hadn't expected, though, was how quickly the universe was about to intervene. The state attorney general's car would arrive any minute, and when it did, the dynamic would change. The very person she thought had no oversight would become her unexpected observer. She spun toward him, indignation written in every line of her face. "Do you hear me? I will make you—" A sudden calm knock at the door stopped her mid-sentence. Marcus opened it slightly, just enough to let the sunlight touch her face. "You might want to take a seat," he said softly. "Someone else is here to watch over things today." For a brief, stunned moment, she froze. Arrogance gave way to confusion. The clipboard lowered slightly. The words she had rehearsed, the threats she had planned, all seemed to vanish in an instant. Marcus took a sip of his coffee, watching the shift with quiet satisfaction. She was powerful in her own mind, but he had something far stronger: patience, preparation, and the law on his side. As the wind rippled across the lake, she glanced past him, catching sight of the black SUV at the end of the dock. The state attorney general stepped out, scanning the property with practiced eyes. Delilah's lips parted, then pressed into a thin line again. Shock, for once, left her vulnerable. Marcus leaned back, finally feeling the first trace of peace that morning. The confrontation was only beginning, but the scales of justice were slowly tipping. She hadn't realized it yet, but today would be the day her overreach met its first consequence. And as the sunlight danced across the lake, Marcus knew one thing for certain: the lake cabin was his, and no amount of rules, threats, or arrogance could take that away. The first ripple of victory had already begun. The morning had barely warmed the quiet streets of the neighborhood when Karen Cromwell returned, clipboard in hand, eyes sharp and fixed on her next target. Her heels clicked against the pavement, each step loud, deliberate, a rhythm meant to intimidate. Marcus Henley had expected persistence, but even he couldn't help noting how predictably she repeated her moves. She doubled down, filing new citations, threatening fines, and rattling off rules as if the words themselves carried power. "You think I don't have authority?" she demanded, voice sharp enough to slice through the calm air. "You will pay these fines immediately. This is not optional." Marcus leaned against his porch railing, calm and unshaken. "Karen, the dock was here long before your HOA even existed. Property records don't lie." She waved him off, as though the facts themselves were irrelevant. "History doesn't matter. The rules are in place now, and you are bound to follow them." Her arrogance was unmistakable, a self-imposed authority that shone in every gesture, every loud declaration. She had convinced herself that control alone could bend reality, and for a moment she seemed unstoppable. But Marcus saw through it. Her power was only as strong as her perception, and perception could be carefully corrected. As she scribbled another citation, neighbors peeked through their blinds, whispering to one another. The murmurs carried across the lawns, curiosity and doubt mixing in the morning air. Some shook their heads, others whispered warnings. Karen noticed a few, her face tightening, but she ignored them, confident in her role. Marcus observed silently, noting patterns in her behavior. She used rules as weapons, wielding them like blunt instruments to impose control. She reacted predictably when challenged, escalating her threats instead of listening. And she underestimated one crucial factor: Marcus wasn't just calm, he was patient. "Look," he said, calm but firm, "these citations don't hold legal weight if they conflict with property records. You're acting on assumptions, not facts." She laughed, a sharp, short sound, dismissing him entirely. "Assumptions? I am authorized by the board. I enforce the law here. You will comply." Her voice carried through the quiet neighborhood, and Marcus could feel the tension rising, not only between them, but across the entire street. Homeowners glanced out, wary of what she might do next. Her actions weren't just affecting him, they were rippling through the community, sowing unease and doubt. Marcus allowed himself a small smile, barely noticeable, as he watched her repeat the same mistakes. Every threat she made, every step she took to assert dominance, left traces. Patterns emerged. She believed the rules were tools for personal control, instruments of her ego, not instruments of justice. That was the opening he needed. "Karen," he said, calm and precise, "I respect that you see yourself as in charge, but authority comes with responsibility. Threatening fines without proper cause isn't authority, it's abuse." She turned sharply, red flashing across her cheeks. "Abuse? I enforce the community standards. You will see consequences." Marcus studied her, noting how quickly anger replaced reason in her mind. That very replacement was her weakness. While she escalated, he planned. While she barked orders, he quietly collected evidence, aligned facts, and mapped legal pathways. She assumed the neighborhood would fear her. Marcus knew they already noticed the cracks. The air between them grew taut, each word a spark ready to ignite. He had expected confrontation, but the scale and boldness of her threat still had a sting. She circled the property, clipboard in hand, scrutinizing every inch of his land as if her gaze could rewrite deeds. Neighbors peeked over fences now, murmurs rising. One whispered, "She's gone too far this time." Another nodded, eyes narrowing at the sight of Karen striding confidently, oblivious to her growing reputation. The very presence meant to enforce rules was now a spectacle of arrogance. Marcus allowed himself to imagine the next steps. He could see how her own actions were setting her up for failure. Every citation issued without merit, every threat made without authority, widened the gap between her and true power. The audience could see it too. The first clear clash between justice and abuse of power was unfolding, a struggle grounded in simple human observation. Karen stomped her foot, scanning the dock again. "You cannot ignore me, Mr. Henley. I am in charge here." Marcus stepped closer to the railing, his calm presence a counterweight to her storm. "You may be in charge of perceptions, but the law doesn't bend to arrogance. Facts matter." Her eyes narrowed, frustration flashing. She had encountered resistance before, but never like this, quiet, deliberate, and confident. Her own method, the loud assertion of control, met with quiet intelligence, was unraveling her. Marcus didn't need to shout. He only needed to wait, to act when the moment was right. Across the street, neighbors exchanged glances, some nervous, some relieved. Karen's overreach was becoming visible, and whispers began to spread. The more she tried to assert dominance, the more fragile her position appeared. She didn't notice, too wrapped up in her perception of authority. Marcus noted her pattern again, internalized it. Threats, fines, citations, escalating gestures, all predictable. She saw rules as tools, not guides. That approach would eventually expose her, and as much as she tried to intimidate, Marcus understood a crucial fact. True power was quiet, grounded, and backed by reality. "You think you control everything," he said, almost conversationally, "but control without understanding is just chaos." Karen paused mid-gesture, a brief flicker of doubt crossing her face. She blinked and scowled, resuming her pacing. But that moment, however fleeting, was a crack in her armor. Marcus observed carefully, storing each movement, each pattern, each misstep. The tension in the neighborhood grew. Conversations whispered behind curtains. Neighbors exchanged cautious glances, and the air seemed to hum with anticipation. It was no longer just a dispute between Marcus and Karen, it was becoming a community affair, a subtle confrontation between patience and arrogance, quiet intelligence and controlling ego. Marcus allowed himself a slow exhale, though outwardly he remained still. He had no need to raise his voice or strike first. Karen's overreach was her own undoing. The citation she waved, the threats she shouted, all served as a record, a breadcrumb trail leading to eventual justice. For now, he watched, calm and observant, letting her missteps pile up. Each aggressive step, each insistence on authority, made her position weaker. The neighborhood could see it, the audience could feel it. The imbalance of power, so stark, was now undeniable. Karen's eyes flicked briefly to a neighbor peeking from a window, frustration flaring again. "This isn't over," she muttered, voice tight. "I enforce rules. You will comply." Marcus shook his head gently, a small, knowing smile playing at the corner of his lips. He didn't need to argue. Her threats, her arrogance, were already being recorded, noted, catalogued. Every pattern she revealed was another step toward balance. As she stomped away, muttering about bored escalation, Marcus returned to the porch, coffee in hand. The morning sun glinted off the dock, the lake calm once more, but the undercurrent of tension remained. He understood her type, recognized the cracks in her perceived authority, and most importantly, knew exactly how this confrontation would play out. It wasn't about shouting louder or demanding more. It was about patience, observation, and precision. Karen had revealed herself, and Marcus was ready. The first ripples of change were already spreading through the neighborhood. Justice, slow and steady, had begun. Marcus Henley sat at his kitchen table, the morning sun spilling across stacks of papers, folders, and old deeds. The quiet cabin was a stark contrast to the chaos of the past few days, but Marcus knew the storm wasn't over. Karen Cromwell's arrogance had only escalated, yet she remained completely unaware of the careful attention he was paying to every detail she had left exposed. He traced his finger along old property maps, comparing them to HOA records. Every discrepancy, every overreach, he noted meticulously. Some citations were plainly erroneous, others vague enough that they were open to interpretation. Marcus made lists, highlighted inconsistencies, and cataloged each citation, preparing a silent arsenal for the moment it would matter most. Neighbors began to appear in the background of his study, not visibly, but in passing conversations over fences and casual morning walks. Marcus spoke carefully, testing the waters. "You ever notice how she jumps to fines without checking the facts?" he asked one neighbor, casual enough to seem like idle conversation. The neighbor nodded, whispering about a misplaced boundary dispute last year. He made calls, discreetly, to others who had quietly suffered under Karen's unchecked authority. Each call was brief, neutral, and careful. No accusations, only confirmations of facts. Slowly, a network of quietly supportive neighbors began to form. Marcus didn't need to rally an army. He only needed witnesses, proof, and patience. Karen, meanwhile, strutted through the neighborhood, clipboard in hand, unaware of the quiet preparations occurring behind closed doors. She continued issuing threats, pointing to rules, and assuming her position as unquestionable. Each misstep she made was a breadcrumb Marcus recorded mentally, cataloging arrogance and impulsiveness alike. "Rules are rules," she said loudly to a passing homeowner, "and everyone must follow them, no exceptions." Even if the rule doesn't apply to your property? The homeowner asked cautiously. Karen waved him off, brushing off questions with the assumption of authority. Marcus smiled quietly, listening from inside his cabin. Every misstep, every small display of overconfidence only confirmed his strategy. Patience, evidence, and methodical planning would be far stronger than shouting or confrontation. He shifted through property deeds, tracing back decades. Marcus noted how his grandfather's cabin and dock predated the HOA's formation, a fact that would be crucial later. He photocopied old maps, scanned letters from previous board communications, and compared them against current citations. Each discrepancy was a thread to pull. While Karen escalated, Marcus remained calm. He organized files by dates, citations, and anomalies. Each page told a story of her impulsive enforcement, a story that could be used not just for his protection, but to expose the imbalance of power. The calmness of his work contrasted sharply with Karen's unchecked arrogance. Neighbors began stopping by casually, offering small pieces of information. "I got fined for leaving my mailbox a foot over the line," said one, voice hushed. Another added, "They warned me about a shed I built decades ago." Marcus collected these accounts with subtle questions, careful to avoid stirring suspicion. Every shared story added weight to his growing dossier. Even his own friends in town noticed the change. Marcus spent afternoons at the local library, pulling public records and zoning maps, connecting the dots with quiet precision. He wasn't just preparing for confrontation, he was constructing a fortress of facts, a strategy built not on anger, but on intellect. Inside the cabin, he reviewed the HOA's meeting minutes from past years. Karen's name appeared repeatedly as the instigator of fines, complaints, and citations. Patterns emerged: impulsive decisions, a reliance on intimidation, and a consistent disregard for documentation. Marcus made notes, mentally filing each instance, each deviation from procedure, ready to use them at the right moment. "What I'm building," Marcus thought to himself, "isn't just a defense, it's a way to show the truth without losing control." His phone buzzed, a quiet message from a neighbor who had finally spoken up about a boundary issue. Marcus replied, keeping the tone neutral. "Thanks, I'm noting it." Every new piece of information strengthened his position. Karen believed she held all the cards, but in truth, her impulsive behavior was revealing the full deck to him. He reflected on the contrast between them. Karen thrived on immediate action, on threats, on public displays of dominance. Marcus thrived on patience, observation, and meticulous documentation. Where she reacted emotionally, he responded strategically. Where she assumed compliance, he prepared for resistance. Every move she made without thinking was another step in his calculated plan. By late afternoon, Marcus had compiled dozens of documents, deeds, citations, HOA rules, personal accounts, and historical property records. Each folder was labeled, each note dated, each detail cross-referenced. It wasn't more than preparation, it was a blueprint for accountability. The cabin felt quieter than ever as he reviewed his notes. The lake outside shimmered in the sunlight, calm and reflective. He allowed himself a moment to breathe. Patience, Marcus reminded himself, was the most powerful weapon. Karen's unchecked arrogance was like a storm gathering force, but he knew how to channel it. Later, he made a final check of his files, ensuring nothing was overlooked. Subtle patterns had emerged: repeated fines for minor, outdated issues, selective enforcement, and blatant disregard for property rights. Marcus made a mental note to track the next time she tried to use intimidation. Every step now could be countered with evidence, every claim rebutted with fact. Meanwhile, Karen walked the neighborhood, still loud, still certain she controlled the narrative. She pointed at properties, barking orders, and issuing verbal threats. Marcus watched from inside, sipping coffee, noting each interaction. Her overconfidence was obvious, a glaring contrast to the quiet, deliberate work occurring just behind the cabin walls. "You think you can build a defense, Mr. Henley?" Karen shouted in the distance, thinking she could provoke him. Marcus smiled faintly. "I'm not building defense. I'm building clarity." The subtle tension rippled through the neighborhood. Some homeowners observed cautiously, sensing an undercurrent of change. The very act of preparation, though invisible to most, shifted the balance. Karen's ego, loud and unchecked, made her predictable. Marcus's patience made him unstoppable. As the sun lowered toward the horizon, Marcus laid out his files in a deliberate pattern on the table. Each folder was a step ahead of her next move, each note a reminder of her mistakes. He leaned back, allowing himself a rare moment of satisfaction. He wasn't visible in her calculations, yet he dominated the situation entirely. The chapter ended not with a confrontation, but with anticipation. Karen remained blind to the growing plan, continuing her impulsive overreach. Marcus, quiet and patient, had one foot firmly planted in the future, ready for the strategic showdown he was quietly orchestrating. The neighborhood, too, began to sense it, the shift in power, the rise of method over arrogance. Conversations whispered behind fences, cautious glances from windows, subtle signs that Karen's reign of unchecked control might finally meet a formidable counter. Marcus didn't need to act yet. Preparation was itself a force, invisible but unyielding, and every day brought him closer to turning her own missteps into undeniable consequences. He glanced at the lake one last time before night fell, calm and reflective. The storm had not yet broken, but he was ready. One day soon, every file, every note, every recorded error would come together, exposing the arrogance that had long gone unchecked. The morning air carried an uneasy tension. Marcus Henley sipped his coffee on the cabin porch, scanning the horizon across the lake. The calm surface belied the storm brewing on land. Karen Cromwell, the self-proclaimed enforcer of every HOA rule, had escalated beyond ordinary threats. Citations now piled on his table like a paper mountain, each one more absurd than the last. She sent letters claiming violations on the dock, the mailbox, even the trees lining his property. Some were small exaggerations, others were outright fabrications. A warning about a non-existent fence, a fine for illegal landscaping. Marcus's eyes narrowed as he read each one. She was no longer merely controlling. She was relentless, personal, and increasingly reckless. "Rules are rules," she declared in a voicemail, clipped and cold, "and I will see them enforced." Marcus allowed himself a small shake of his head. Rules didn't frighten him. Preparation and evidence were stronger than her fury. He began cataloging the latest citations, adding photographs, timestamps, and copies of prior correspondence. Each file was a thread in the growing tapestry of accountability he was weaving. Neighbors were changing their routines. Walks along the road became furtive, conversations shorter, eyes glancing nervously toward her house. Rumors traveled faster than the HOA newsletters. Homeowners whispered about new fines, threats of liens, and mysterious letters delivered under cover of evening. Fear had become contagious. "Did you get another notice?" one neighbor asked cautiously as he passed by the fence. "I did," he replied evenly, "and I documented everything." The simplicity of his words carried quiet authority. Marcus didn't need to argue. Documentation was his language. Patience, his power. He noted how Karen relied on intimidation and surprise, but failed to anticipate calm resistance or strategic thinking. In his cabin, he spread the new citations across the table. The room felt crowded with paper and ink, a map of Karen's growing obsession. Each falsified violation and inflated fine was proof not of his guilt, but of her overreach. He made lists of discrepancies, referenced local property laws, and cross-checked every claim. Her harassment was thorough, but so was his preparation. Still, the pressure mounted. Each letter and voicemail carried a psychological weight that no amount of documentation could immediately erase. The threat of liens, of escalating fees, gnawed at the edges of his focus. But Marcus reminded himself of one principle. Evidence was power, and power required patience. Karen appeared in the neighborhood, clipboard in hand, her voice carrying across yards. "You all need to comply. You know the rules." She pointed randomly at mailboxes and fences, issuing corrections and fines to anyone within earshot. Her overconfidence was stunning, as if the laws of logic and fairness did not apply to her. Marcus observed discreetly, noting her method, loud, public, designed to intimidate and humiliate. Yet in every mistake she made, mislabeling properties, issuing duplicate fines, citing outdated rules, he saw openings. His strategy was already forming in his mind, each harassment creating a countermeasure ready to be deployed. By mid-afternoon, Marcus was reviewing previous successful challenges he had prepared. Small victories, like overturning a minor citation about dock maintenance, were satisfying but insufficient. Karen's escalation meant that these wins were only temporary relief. The real challenge lay ahead, turning her missteps into undeniable leverage. Neighbors continued to share their own stories quietly. One couple mentioned a fine for an illegal flower bed, something that had existed for 20 years. Another noted a notice threatening a lien for a fictitious deck. Marcus cataloged each account, creating a detailed network of evidence to support not only his case, but a pattern of abuse that could not be ignored. The psychological pressure was palpable. Even casual conversations in town had a cautious undertone. People whispered, glanced over shoulders, worried about being targeted next. Marcus understood the stakes. Karen's actions were no longer just a nuisance. They were a campaign, one designed to destabilize property owners and bend them to her will. Inside the cabin, he methodically photographed every notice, scanned every letter, and cross-referenced them with HOA bylaws and local property regulations. He noted inconsistencies in dates, contradictions in rules, and even instances where her own authority conflicted with recorded HOA procedures. Every detail strengthened his quiet strategy, building toward an eventual reckoning. As evening approached, a call came in from another neighbor, voice trembling. "They've threatened my property with liens. I don't know what to do." Marcus listened, offering calm reassurance. "Document everything. Keep copies. Note the dates and the exact wording. Stay calm. That's the most powerful move right now." He realized that Karen's harassment was no longer a private war. It had become a neighborhood concern. People were afraid, uncertain, and waiting for someone to push back. Marcus's calm and deliberate actions stood in sharp contrast to the chaos she spread. His approach was not reactive. It was intentional, methodical, and growing stronger every day. By nightfall, Marcus had reviewed every single citation issued in the past 2 weeks. Each one revealed more patterns: impulsive decisions, selective enforcement, and repeated exaggeration. The harassment wasn't random. It was a reflection of Karen's personal need for control, her desire to assert dominance over every homeowner who dared to maintain their independence. Marcus leaned back in his chair, exhausted but determined. He could feel the pressure, the mental strain of constant vigilance, but it was manageable. Every false citation, every threat, every inflated fine was part of a larger picture, a picture he was finally ready to complete. The pressure was growing, the stakes rising, and the inevitable confrontation loomed closer with each passing day. Marcus looked out at the darkening lake one last time. The storm had intensified, but he was steady. His quiet, calculated patience had transformed the mounting harassment into evidence, his methodical approach now stronger than Karen's impulsive fury. One day soon, her arrogance would meet consequences she never anticipated. And when that day came, justice would not only be personal, it would be undeniable. Marcus Henley leaned back in his cabin chair, reviewing his growing collection of documents. The lake outside reflected the afternoon sun, calm and unyielding. He had spent weeks cataloging every citation, every fine, every unjust letter from Karen Cromwell. Alone, it was a formidable task, but he knew that alone, victory would be slower, riskier, and maybe incomplete. Allies would turn his methodical preparation into unstoppable force. He began quietly reaching out to people he trusted. First, neighbors who had felt the brunt of Karen's overreach. They were hesitant at first, fearing retaliation, but Marcus's calm authority and meticulous records gave them confidence. Document everything, every letter, every phone call, he told them. Voice even, but firm. It's not personal, it's preparation. A retired couple who lived 3 houses down shared their own stack of notices, each more absurd than the last. Marcus took note of every date, every violation, every contradictory claim. "She fines for things that never changed in 20 years, the neighbor whispered. Marcus nodded, absorbing each detail. These accounts were more than anecdotes. They were evidence of a pattern, a story of abuse he could prove. Next, he contacted a former coworker who had experience in local regulations and administrative procedures. Quietly, without fanfare, they examined HOA bylaws and zoning rules, highlighting loopholes and inconsistencies. Marcus realized that Karen's arrogance was her greatest weakness. She assumed no one would challenge her interpretation of the rules, but with support, those interpretations could be dismantled with cold precision. Finally, Marcus called on a lawyer friend who specialized in property disputes and HOA regulations. They discussed the long game, legal leverage, potential counters to fines, and strategies to challenge fabricated citations. Marcus took notes carefully, every conversation logged, every suggestion recorded. The plan was slowly transforming from a mental strategy into a structured roadmap, step by step, action by action. As word spread, neighbors began noticing patterns they hadn't before. Karen's behavior was not random, not casual. It was systematic. Fines appeared at intervals, citations targeted specific properties, and public confrontations were timed for maximum intimidation. The community began to connect the dots, quietly rallying behind Marcus's methodical resistance. One neighbor approached cautiously while watering her front lawn. "I've always been scared to speak up," she admitted. "But you make sense. You're calm and you're prepared." Marcus gave a small nod, understanding that calm authority could inspire more than threats ever could. He encouraged her to document her own experiences, reminding her that facts were the strongest form of defense. Meanwhile, Karen's arrogance continued unchecked. She strutted along streets with her clipboard, barking orders, issuing fines, and lecturing homeowners. Every time, Marcus recorded, cataloged, and cross-checked. Every misstep she made became a brick in the structure of accountability he was building. The contrast was stark, her impulsive aggression versus his quiet, disciplined approach. Marcus also realized that allyships weren't just about shared stories, they were about coordination. A neighbor offered to take photos of irregular inspections. Another offered to retrieve historical records from the county office. Each act, small in isolation, combined to form an invisible web of support. Marcus carefully wove them into a strategy, ensuring that when the time came, he could act decisively. Over dinners and weekend coffees, he taught neighbors simple tactics: how to log interactions, how to store digital copies of citations, and how to identify repeated patterns. The calm collective effort created a quiet resistance that Karen could not anticipate. She still believed she ruled unchallenged, unaware that Marcus's plan was growing, reinforced by the very people she sought to intimidate. The psychological shift in the neighborhood was subtle but real. People who once flinched at a knock on the door or a note in the mailbox now exchanged knowing glances and nods. They didn't speak openly of rebellion, but they were quietly taking control. Marcus was not just preparing for legal challenges, he was cultivating a network of courage. At the cabin, Marcus laid out his strategy on a large table, documents arranged in precise order. Evidence, witness accounts, legal notes, and photographic proof formed an organized map of Karen's overreach. The plan had multiple layers: immediate legal challenges, strategic public exposure, and a timeline for action that maximized both pressure and leverage. Marcus reflected on the contrast between himself and Karen. She relied on volume, intimidation, and impulsive authority. He relied on preparation, allyships, and intelligence. Every move she made in arrogance provided him more insight. Every casual threat, every fabricated fine was a piece of the puzzle he was quietly assembling. Late one evening, a neighbor stopped by with a new piece of information: a notice threatening a lien for a minor landscaping issue, one that contradicted HOA bylaws from the previous decade. Marcus studied it, nodding silently. It was exactly the type of inconsistency that could be challenged decisively. With allies and evidence at hand, these small incidents became powerful leverage points. During a neighborhood meeting, Marcus spoke calmly, addressing a room of wary homeowners. "We are not against the HOA," he explained softly. "We are against abuse of power. Document everything, pay attention, keep records. When we act with clarity and proof." Murmurs of agreement ran through the crowd. His words carried quiet authority, planting the seed of collective awareness. By now, Karen had no idea of the quiet coalition forming around Marcus. She continued her daily rounds of citations, loud and brash, confident that fear alone could maintain control. Yet each action she took was feeding the network Marcus had cultivated, providing witnesses, proof, and confirmation of her overreach. Inside the cabin, Marcus leaned back, reviewing the latest documents from allies. He smiled faintly, recognizing the power of preparation. Alone, he could challenge her abuses. With support, he could dismantle her authority entirely. The scale of the upcoming confrontation was growing, and he was ready, calm and methodical. He realized that true power did not come from shouting, from intimidation, or from relentless harassment. It came from intelligence, planning, and allyships. Karen's noise and arrogance were temporary. Marcus's strategy, quietly nurtured and carefully executed, would endure. The chapter ended with Marcus gathering his files, reviewing notes from neighbors, and mentally rehearsing the steps ahead. The storm had grown louder, but so had his confidence. The next moves were critical, and they would require both precision and patience. Allies were ready, evidence was organized, and the community was waking to the truth. As night settled over the lake, Marcus looked out at the still water. The calm surface reflected the sky, untouched by the chaos of human conflict. He allowed himself a brief smile. The plan was working. The web of preparation and support he had built was solidifying, and the imbalance of power would soon begin to shift. Justice, quiet but inevitable, was gathering momentum. The tension in the air was electric, but controlled. Marcus knew the next chapters would bring confrontation, exposure, and the eventual reckoning. Karen continued to believe herself untouchable, blind to the alliances and evidence forming just beyond her awareness. But the truth was clear. When the time came, she would face the consequences of unchecked arrogance, and Marcus, with allies at his side, would be ready. Marcus sat at his desk, a stack of HOA documents spread before him like a battlefield map. Each page held numbers, dates, and rules that seemed innocuous at first glance, but to Marcus, they told a story. He meticulously reviewed public records, cross-checking fees, citations, and board meeting notes. One by one, discrepancies began to surface. Improper fines, misfiled claims, unexplained surcharges. Nothing blatant, nothing obvious, but enough to create a pattern. He leaned back, letting the quiet of the cabin settle around him, and thought about Karen. She prowled the neighborhood like a storm cloud, barking orders, sending threats, imagining herself untouchable. Yet she had no idea Marcus was quietly dismantling the foundations of her authority. He didn't confront her directly. He didn't need to. Each smart move, each carefully documented inconsistency, chipped away at her credibility. Neighbors started to notice subtle changes. A casual mention at the mailbox, a knowing glance across a fence. Marcus's careful inquiries and discreet conversations planted seeds of doubt. Community members whispered about missing funds, questionable citations, and the arrogance of a woman who wielded HOA rules like a weapon. At night, Marcus compiled his findings into a tidy, undeniable record. He contacted a trusted lawyer friend, sharing the patterns he had uncovered. They nodded at each anomaly together, building a strategy that was invisible to the outside world, but unstoppable in effect. Meanwhile, Karen continued her reign unchecked, unaware that her power was slipping. She sent another notice to Marcus, a threatening reminder of her imagined authority. He read it calmly, highlighting every false claim, every misapplied rule. A smile crept across his face. Every move she made now became evidence against her. Marcus also began quietly leveraging official channels. Emails to local government offices, queries into HOA compliance reports, subtle reminders that certain rules had been violated or ignored. Each action left a faint but lasting mark, slowly drawing the line between lawful authority and personal vendetta. By the end of the week, he had enough to make a subtle but powerful case. The imbalance of power was shifting. Karen's actions were no longer unopposed. Every misstep she made, every mismanaged fee, every ignored regulation was now meticulously recorded, ready for the moment it would count the most. Marcus leaned back and took a deep breath. Patience had its reward. Action didn't always mean confrontation. Quiet, calculated moves could be louder than any yell or threat. And the moment for the real showdown was drawing near. As he closed his files for the night, a faint sound outside caught his attention. A neighbor's car slowly rolled by, windows down, conversation hushed but pointed. Marcus knew the ripple effect was starting. Karen's storm was gathering, but this time she was walking into a carefully set trap. The anticipation in the air was sharp, almost electric. The quiet of the cabin felt different now. Marcus could almost hear the shift in the neighborhood, the first tremors of justice about to break through. And somewhere down the lane, Karen's confident stride would soon meet the consequences of her arrogance. The first subtle signs of a crumbling empire were in place. Marcus just had to wait, and when the time came, everything would fall into line perfectly. Karen strutted through the neighborhood like a queen surveying her kingdom, clipboard in hand, confident and unbothered. To her, every rule she wrote, every fine she issued, was proof of power. But Marcus watched quietly, noting every step, every misjudgment. Her arrogance had grown unchecked, and with it came blind spots she didn't even know existed. It started small, an overreaching citation against a neighbor for a minor garden infraction. Then another, this time clearly violating HOA bylaws. She live-streamed herself confronting homeowners, oblivious that the law she thought supported her was being quietly dismantled under her feet. Marcus documented everything, screenshots, timestamps, and videos that showed not authority, but overreach. Neighbors began noticing inconsistencies. Whispers spread in driveways and across fences. "Did you see that notice? It doesn't even match the rules." Karen's confident smile faltered when a friend asked about a dubious fee, only for her to stammer. The cracks were appearing, just as Marcus had predicted. Marcus wasn't just waiting, he was gathering proof. He cross-referenced public records, HOA financials, and board meeting notes. Every mismanaged fund, every unapproved action, every legal violation was another thread unraveling Karen's carefully constructed image of control. He emailed a concise summary to his lawyer friend, who immediately recognized how explosive the evidence could be. Karen, meanwhile, continued her tirade, issuing more threats and fines, oblivious that each one was being recorded meticulously. She bragged online, thinking her followers or neighbors would fear her. Instead, she exposed herself. Her arrogance became a live exhibit of poor judgment. The tension in the neighborhood was tangible. Homeowners who had once quietly tolerated her began to side with Marcus, quietly rallying behind the calm authority of someone who understood both law and strategy. One afternoon, Marcus noticed a particularly brazen act: Karen personally entering a property she had no right to inspect, filming herself while ignoring posted notices. Marcus captured it all. It was a turning point. What had been minor doubts in the community's eyes now grew into undeniable evidence of misconduct. By evening, Karen's credibility had started to crumble. Officials who had once taken her letter seriously now questioned her judgment. Social media buzzed with short clips highlighting her mistakes. Marcus remained calm, reviewing every clip, every financial discrepancy, every misstep. Each one was another layer of protection for him, a buffer against future conflict. He reached out to a neighbor, pointing out minor violations that Karen had fabricated, showing how they contradicted HOA rules. The neighbor's eyes widened, finally seeing the pattern. Marcus felt the satisfaction of quiet justice building, not through confrontation, but through foresight and intelligence. Karen, unaware of the storm quietly forming, sent another live stream, ranting about alleged property violations. But this time, her viewers noticed her contradictions, the rule violations she committed in real time. Marcus smiled. The pieces were falling into place. The tension in the neighborhood reached a peak. People whispered, documents circulated, and the once unquestioned power of Karen Cromwell was slipping. Marcus, calm as ever, knew the moment of reckoning was near. As night fell, Marcus looked over his property, the lake glinting softly in the moonlight. He had watched, recorded, and planned. Karen had shown her hand, reckless, arrogant, exposed. The stage was set, and soon, very soon, justice would move. The first true cracks had appeared in her armor, and Marcus knew that once the collapse began, there would be no stopping it. The calm before the storm had never felt so charged. Marcus stood quietly at the edge of his lake cabin, the morning sun glinting off the water, reflecting the calm determination in his eyes. Weeks of planning, documenting, and observing had led to this moment. Karen Cromwell, once untouchable in her self-assured authority, was about to discover just how carefully her every move had been tracked. He opened a folder, thick with records, property deeds proving his land was legally grandfathered, detailed comparisons of HOA bylaws versus the fines she had issued, and a carefully compiled ledger of her financial mismanagement. Every citation she had ever sent, every threat, every violation she had fabricated, it was all there. Marcus had built a mountain of evidence that left no room for denial. Karen stormed onto the property again, brimming with her usual arrogance, clipboard in hand, ready to lecture and assert control. She had no idea that today the tables would turn. Marcus greeted her calmly, voice steady, eyes unwavering. "You've overstepped again," he said, sliding a folder across the table. "And this time there's proof." Her eyes widened as she skimmed the pages. Property records showed his rights were permanent, legally protected. Financial documents revealed mismanagement, unapproved spending, and even fraudulent activity. Every attempt to intimidate him now stood exposed as baseless and illegal. At that exact moment, headlights swept across the driveway. Cars bearing the state attorney general's insignia rolled in. Uniformed officers stepped out, calm but authoritative. Karen froze. Her face, once so confident, tightened with panic. She stammered, trying to regain composure, but words failed her. Marcus remained calm, almost serene. He had anticipated this moment, and his patience had paid off. The AG's team moved quickly, reviewing documents, asking pointed questions. Karen's once commanding tone faltered under scrutiny. The power she wielded with such ease moments ago had vanished, replaced by nervous stammers and desperate justifications. Neighbors, drawn by the commotion, watched from a distance. Whispers filled the air. "Did you see that? She's done it again, but it's backfiring." Marcus's quiet authority contrasted sharply with Karen's unraveling demeanor. Every witness, every official, saw the contrast between methodical intelligence and unchecked arrogance. The state attorney general looked directly at Karen, outlining her violations with precision. Fines were being reviewed, improper charges voided, and investigations into her fraudulent behavior initiated. Karen tried to interrupt, but the evidence was irrefutable. Marcus listened, satisfied but composed, knowing the law was now firmly on his side. Even online, clips from the confrontation began circulating. Her mistakes, once hidden behind bravado, were now public. The story of her unchecked power turning into exposed recklessness spread quickly. Marcus had achieved justice without losing his calm. His careful preparation, patience, and understanding of the rules had dismantled her authority piece by piece. As the officials escorted Karen off the property, Marcus stepped back, breathing in the crisp lake air. Peace returned slowly, punctuated by the quiet satisfaction of seeing patience, intelligence, and lawful action triumph over arrogance. He watched the water ripple, reflecting the sunlight in gentle waves, a silent celebration of justice served. The ordeal was not over completely. Legal follow-ups would take time, but the turning point had come. Karen's reign of intimidation had ended, replaced by accountability. Marcus smiled softly, knowing that control, when wielded responsibly, could achieve far more than threats ever could. The lake remained calm, the cabin intact, and the neighborhood quietly acknowledged the triumph of reason over tyranny. Marcus had not just defended his property, he had restored order, proving that careful planning and courage could topple even the most overconfident adversary. And as he walked back inside, folder in hand, he felt a sense of closure, knowing the long battle had reached its satisfying apex. Karen Cromwell's confident stride had vanished. The woman who once dictated fines and citations with a smirk now faced a crowd of officials, neighbors, and the weight of undeniable evidence. Marcus watched calmly, every step measured, as the consequences she had avoided for years finally caught up. Letters of formal fines, notices of criminal investigations, and public declarations stripped her of the power she had wielded so carelessly. Every overreach, every fabricated violation, every attempt to intimidate homeowners was documented and presented clearly. Marcus had left nothing to chance. Neighbors gathered quietly but noticeably, their whispered conversations now tinged with relief. "Finally," one said, "she can't just push us around anymore." Another nodded, glancing at Marcus with a mix of respect and gratitude. He had not shouted, not fought physically. He had let the truth, patience, and the law speak. Karen tried to protest, her voice rising in panic. I didn't." But officials interrupted, calmly reading through the records she could no longer deny. Criminal charges for harassment and mismanagement were confirmed. Fines she had tried to enforce on innocent homeowners were voided. Her HOA authority was officially revoked. Marcus stood firm, his expression neutral, absorbing the scene. He had prepared for this moment meticulously. Every document, every precedent, every pattern of abuse collected and verified. Watching Karen stumble through her excuses, he felt the quiet satisfaction of strategy, intelligence, and justice prevailing. The community felt the shift immediately. Conversations grew louder with confidence. Homeowners who once feared retaliation began to speak openly. Marcus's calm presence inspired them, proving that patience and evidence could counter unchecked arrogance. Karen's fall was not just a personal victory, it was a community triumph. Even online, news and videos spread of the HOA president exposed and held accountable. Social media echoed the same moral that Marcus had always known. Abuse of power is temporary, while integrity, intelligence, and strategy endure. Her attempts at control crumbled under scrutiny, and the people she had tried to dominate now felt empowered. Karen's face was pale, her usual self-assured tone replaced by mutters and nervous glances. The weight of public exposure and legal accountability left her humiliated. Marcus observed quietly, knowing he had given no room for error or escape. Justice had been measured, thorough, and undeniable. Neighbors approached Marcus with gratitude and relief. "You saved us from her," one said softly. He nodded, but the real reward was not recognition. It was seeing fairness restored, seeing rules honored, and witnessing a community regain its voice. As Karen was escorted away, her power stripped entirely, Marcus finally allowed himself a deep breath. The lake cabin, the quiet mornings, and the peaceful neighborhood now reflected balance and order. The storm of abuse had passed, and calm returned, stronger than before. Justice was done, and Marcus, ever patient and strategic, had shown that true authority comes not from intimidation, but from preparation, intelligence, and a steadfast belief in fairness. The community could finally heal, knowing that one man's quiet perseverance had toppled arrogance and restored peace. Karen's fall would remain a story whispered for years, a reminder that no matter how high someone rises through fear, truth and integrity always prevail. A subtle smile crossed Marcus's face as he stepped inside his cabin. The fight was over, the lesson was clear, and the neighborhood, once silenced, now thrived in the light of justice. The lake cabin finally breathed with the calm of a morning untroubled by overreach. Marcus stood on the deck, gazing at the water's glassy surface, reflecting a sky that promised clear days ahead. The tension that had clung to every corner of his property and neighborhood was gone, replaced by quiet assurance. Every citation, every unjust fine, every intimidation tactic had been exposed, and now the HOA's mismanagement was laid bare for all to see. Neighbors wandered freely, greeting one another without hesitation, sharing small smiles that had been scarce for months. Conversations buzzed with relief, punctuated by laughter that had once been silenced by fear. Marcus watched from the cabin, recognizing the subtle shift. People felt empowered again. They understood that rules exist to protect, not to control, and that someone had finally stood up, not with anger, but with intelligence and patience. Marcus walked through the property, noting each improvement and careful boundary marker he had added. Protective measures were in place, legal and physical safeguards designed to prevent anyone from repeating Karen's abuses. He had not needed to fight rashly or raise his voice. Every action had been deliberate, every move calculated. And that measured approach had turned fear into respect and chaos into order. Neighbors approached, offering thanks and sharing stories of how her reign of overreach had affected them. Marcus listened, absorbing their gratitude without pride. The real victory was not in recognition, but in restoring dignity to a community that had been silenced. He reminded them, quietly, that knowledge and calm courage were stronger than brute force or threats. In the evenings, Marcus often reflected on the months of planning, observing, and acting with precision. Every document he filed, every pattern he noted, every alliance he quietly nurtured had been part of a larger tapestry. The tapestry had revealed truth and toppled arrogance, proving that clever, steady action could overcome even the most oppressive authority. Children played near the lake again, their laughter filling the air as neighbors watched on free from fear of arbitrary rules. Marcus smiled faintly, feeling the weight of peace settle over the property he loved. The cabin no longer felt like a battleground. It was a home, a refuge, a symbol of resilience. Even as celebrations unfolded, Marcus reminded himself that vigilance would always be necessary. But now the precedent was clear. Property rights matter. Authority must be accountable, and a calm, patient mind can turn injustice into restoration.